Okay, so my talk is quite personal, so you don't need any pens or papers, I'm sure. I'm going to read through the notes to you because I tend to ramble because it's quite personal, so I'm going to stick to the notes whilst I'm talking. So my name is Heather Agyepong and I'm a photographic artist with an interest in visual sociology. You can read it if you want. My photographic career was initiated by a deeply personal struggle with my own... I don't know if that is. Speak up. Oh, sorry. Your phone broke. That's So, my photographic career was initiated by a deeply personal struggle with my own inadequacies as a member of the African diaspora and the challenges that faced me as a result. I grew up resenting my parents and the cultural practices of a Ghanaian upbringing. The causes of this were mostly to do with my experiences of growing up in the UK, where I was constantly bombarded with negative portrayals of Ghana and Africa, mostly. Africa seems to become more and more synonymous with poverty, Western intervention, and its crutching dependence. A number of my fellow second-generational friends shared these same hindrances, and although people mention the need to reframe African issues, there are physical manifestations in the people who hear, read, and internalise these negative sense of self. So I decided to study psychology as a means of self-diagnosis and quickly realised the urgency of eradicating this self-hate. So I visited Ghana on a number of occasions between 2009 and 2013 and used my camera as a means of therapeutic reflection, creating visual symbols of personal truths that I uncovered on the streets of Accra. The camera became my mediatory tool. My practice became tied with challenging perceptions, understanding cultural meanings, and deconstructing binary constructs. I was inspired by a book written by anthropologist Mary Douglas called Purity and Danger, which immediately reminded me of how we think of the global south and different parts of Western Europe. My research brought me to issues surrounding dirt, objects situated within the public realm, and finally electronic waste. So to cut a long story short, I stumbled across a video called Digital Dumping Ground. Once again, there were images of despair, death, and the poverty-stricken African rummaging for scraps. So I was utterly shocked by this because this was Ghana. But little did I know that this was not my first introduction to one of the world's largest e-waste dump sites, known as Agbogbloshie. So throughout my rebellious years, my mother threatened to send me to Sodom and Gomorrah, which I always believed to be some sort of biblical metaphor for a heathen cesspit, not an actual place. So Sodom and Gomorrah is the nickname for Agbogbloshie. I researched images and articles relating to Agbogbloshie, and all I seemed to find were static portrait images of young, lifeless, filthy, desperate children. Words such as scavengers and helpless kept appearing throughout the articles, and key questions of what are we going to do for them, how can we stop e-waste were repeated. So I knew how proud Ghanaians were, and I wanted to know how the inhabitants of Agbogbloshie felt about themselves, the work they were doing, and how we could actually help. So I planned my trip to Agbogbloshie, but even my own mother told me I'd either be killed, robbed, or kidnapped. So on that advice, I booked my flight within a week. So I made contact with the Restart Project. Oh, they've gone. Restart Project. Oh, great. Yasmin from AMP and Rafa before I ventured to Ghana. So when we arrived, I stood there for around a minute, completely silent, because this wasn't the place I read in The Guardian, or read in newspapers, or read online, or heard from other Ghanaians. The place seemed radically different. There were clusters of organisations, little stations, kind of hierarchical systems. It felt like a managerial team. There was a workflow, economic transactions, and even a bank there. Money was saved, money was spent, and sent to northern regions of Ghana where families had been left behind. A friend introduced me to a man who ran a charity in Ghana, whose brother had been killed in Agbogbloshie, and vowed to help a number of young men and women who currently live there. He began telling me that Agbogbloshie is a gold mine. European journalists and researchers flocked to the site regularly to gain images, interviews, and even blood samples from the boys who burn the waste, promising healthcare, education, and jobs, and never returning with anything. So the boys felt like nothing was actually happening. People kept coming there to intervene, but just kind of getting what they wanted and leaving. The boys were incredibly angry. There was a point where I was trying to get informed consent from the boys, and they were kind of... I was with Rafa, but Rafa was oblivious. They were speaking in Twi, and they were saying things like, "Get out, why are you here? You're going to take our pictures and you're going to leave," and a whole bunch of insults. But Rafa was oblivious, but I was petrified. The boys felt that nobody was actually listening to them and asked for their opinions of how we could actually help and our help can be utilised efficiently. So I'm not trying to paint these sites as a paradise, but a place of potential. The majority of the electronic waste are in these third world countries, and we often put on our white coats and our clipboards and make judgments without a long, detailed collective dialogue with the people it directly affects. The psychosocial implications of our intervention must be constantly scrutinised, and we must humble ourselves to work with and not on behalf of the people. So my project, The Gaze on Agbogbloshie, attempts to challenge our current misrepresentations of issues such as e-waste in an African context, and how ideas can be distorted, even unintentionally, through historical influences towards third world problems. The majority of people here understand its importance, but mainstream spheres must follow suit. I believe we have something to learn from the informal recyclers who turn our waste into something of value and challenge our understandings of waste and commodity culture. Perhaps we should take off our white coats, put down our clipboards and checklists, and listen to the ones who turn our waste into new objects or risk making matters worse. Thank you.